And you guys see the PowerPoint, correct?
Yes, it's beautiful.
All right. So, March into Women's History Month, a commemoration set aside to honor women's contribution in American history, including in the US military. And on March 1987, President Ronald Reagan signed a proclamation dedicating March as Women's History Month. The proclamation read, "From earliest times, women have helped shape our nation. Women have fought for moral and social reform and have taken part in and led many great social and political movements of our land. Women have founded many of our philanthropic, cultural, educational, and charitable institutions. Women have served our nation with valor and distinction during wartime, nursing the wounded, piloting airplanes, performing vital jobs, and in defense plans." But prior to 1987, the first celebrated International Women's Day was March 8th in 1911. And then in 1978, the school district of Sonoma, California participated in Women's History Week, designed around the week of March 8th. And in February 1980, President Jimmy Carter issued a proclamation declaring the week of March 8th to be National Women History Week. And he went on to say, his proclamation said, "Men and women have worked together to build this nation. Too often the women were unsung and sometimes their contribution went unnoticed. But the achievement, leadership, courage, strength, and love of the women who built America was as vital as that of the men whose name we know so well." So by 1986, a year before Reagan signed his proclamation, 14 states had already declared March as Women's History Month. So from the battlefields of the American Revolutionary War to the deserts of Kuwait, women have been serving in military in one form or another for more than 200 years. They have had to overcome decades of obstacles to get to where they are today, serving in greater numbers and in combat roles and in leadership positions all around the world. Here is a look at the history of women in military and how their roles have changed over the years. Oh, hang on. Okay. Going back to 1775 Revolutionary War, although women were not always permitted to enlist in the US Armed Forces, many still found ways to serve their nation. As husbands, sons, brothers, fathers joined the Continental Army, so did wives, sisters, daughters, and mothers. They helped boost morale, mended clothes, tended to the wounds, foraged, cooked, cleaned, and also cleaned and maintained cannons. And they also found their way to fight for independence by disguising themselves as men, as Margaret Corbin did, as she fought next to her husband in the Battle of Fort Washington, where she carried on the fight after her husband was struck by enemy fire. Similarly, Deborah Sampson fought distinguished as a man for several years before her true sex was revealed. Other women, such as Linda Dara, also supported the war efforts by spying on behalf of the Patriots. Going on to the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, nearly 20,000 women lent their skills and efforts in everything from growing crops to feed Union troops to cooking in Army camps. Notably, it was during the Civil War that women began to serve as nurses on a much larger and more official scale. And approximately 3,000 women served as nurses for the Union Army during the war. With the high need of nurses, it allowed Clara Barton, Red Cross founder, to travel directly onto the battlefield to tend to the wounded soldiers. And alongside fellow trailblazer Dorothy Dix was appointed superintendent of the United States Army nurses for the Union Army, and is remembered for pursuing high standards of behavioral and training among her nurses, as well as providing ample opportunities for female nurses working in support of in the military. Historians estimate that about 1,000 women disguised themselves as men and fought on the both sides of the Civil War. Going on into the 20th century, World War I changed everything for women in the military. 400 nurses at that time were in active duty. By June 1918, just over a year later, there were more than 3,000 American nurses deployed to British-operated hospitals in France, often working in hostile and gargantuous conditions near the front lines, caring for troops, civilians, and allies. Also, the first time women were allowed to openly serve in the US military. And due to the large number of American men being sent to war, the armed forces and the US Navy in particular needed stateside replacement for the roles that were left behind after finding a loophole in a naval act that would allow women to serve in non-commissioned officers and non-combat roles. The Navy enlisted its first Yometis, I don't think I'm saying that right. Around 12,000 women served in the rank of yeomen, mostly working clerical duties as well as telephone and radio operators. Moving on to World War II. And World War II created an unpredicted need for service members, and more than 16 million Americans stepped up to serve on the front lines. The majority of those being men. The US military was left with many non-combat roles that needed to be filled. So the women of the United States stepped up. And for the first time in history, all branches of the military enlisted women in their ranks. The Army formed the Women Army Auxiliary Corps, which later renamed to the Women's Army Corps, WACS. Then the Navy formed the Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service, WAVES. The Marine Corps, the Marines enlisted women in Marine Corps Women's Reserve. And the Coast Guard had SPARS, which stood for the Coast Guard motto, Semper Paratus and Always Faithful. In total, nearly 350,000 American women served in uniform during World War II. These women took on non-combative roles in order to free up men for the fight. And they contributed to work clerical jobs as they did during World War I, but they also drove vehicles, repaired planes, worked in laboratories and in cryptology, served as radio and telephone operators, rigged parachutes, test flew planes, and trained their male counterparts in air combat tactics. Through these women and their perseverance, the dedication to serve throughout the wars, they have helped pave the way for women in military who would come after them. And I would like to share that just this year on March 8th, 2022, the trailblazing World War II 6888 unit was announced to receive the Congressional Gold Medal. This unit was a pioneering all African American Women Army Corps battalion to serve overseas in World War II, and of more than 850 women who cleared up a backlog of millions of pieces of mails that led to the decline in troop morale. Only 6 remain living today that will be recognized. Moving on to the Korean War, in 1948, 3 years after the end of World War II, President Harry S. Truman signed the Women's Armed Service Integration Act into law, officially allowing women to serve as full permanent members of all branches of the armed forces. However, this was not a guarantee of equal opportunity. The act actually restricted the number of women who could serve to only 2% of each branch, and also limited how many women could become officers. Additionally, female service members could be automatically discharged if they became pregnant and they were unable to command men or serve in combat positions. During the Korean War, there were 120,000 women on active duty. And at the time, Mobile Army Surgical Hospital MASH was vital to the war, and women also served on medevac aircrafts, hospital ships, and others served in military hospitals in various parts of the United States. Going on to Vietnam, of the Vietnam War, approximately 11,000 women were stationed in Vietnam during the nearly 20-year war. 90% of them were nurses in the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Notably, most volunteered to go. So during the Vietnam War, other female service members worked as traffic controllers, intelligence officers, clerks, and in 1967, President Lyndon B. Johnson opened promotion for women to general and flag ranks. And in 1972, women were allowed to command units that included men. The US involvement in the Vietnam War came to a close in 1973, and 2 years later, the Pentagon announced that pregnant women could remain in the military. I'm going to pause here to bring notice that women had been serving in roles meant for men and went against social norms, breaking through barriers, but were still branded as inferior, subordinate, a waste of resources, too weak to vote, and treated as second-class citizens. Evident of the first Supreme Court case argued by Ruth Gator Ginsburg, Frontiero versus Richardson, I had to mention RBG. She really changed the foundation and the equality, as far as equality for women and racial and women. And her first case in front of the Supreme Court was to defend and change the law to allow a eligible service woman to receive housing benefits as a service member in the 1970s. She was denied housing. She noticed that her peers were being paid more than her, and she learned that she was not entitled to the housing allowance that was given to her male counterparts. So it took a rectifying of the law in order for that woman's husband, that woman and her family to receive that housing allowance and additional pay. So moving forward, the participation of women in history has paved the way for all of us have come after to pursue the skies. There is no limit to what we can achieve. Okay, moving forward. All right. Oops. Yeah. Cool. The 80s, 90s, and today. In 1994, the United States government placed an official ban on women serving in combat roles. At the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, there were a lot of firsts for women in the military. The first women, oh, I forgot to say that was actually lifted. That was actually lifted in 2015, and we were allowed to support direct combatant roles. And that came with a lot of firsts. The first women to become a Navy fighter pilot, the first female four-star general, and the first female rescue swimmer in the Coast Guard. The first Silver Star awarded to a female soldier since World War II. The first woman and Native American to die in a combat zone, Lori Patsiwa. Today women comprise just over 15% of the military, and since September 11, over 350,000 women have deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq, and 166 women have been killed during combat operations, and more than 1,000 have been wounded. I also want to acknowledge the contributions of Vanessa Guillen and the Vanessa Guillen Act that was passed, which now also, there's always been an issue with gender and women existing in the male-dominated field. And it came with some forms of sexual harassment and assault. And in the military, it's a really big issue still today, unfortunately. But Vanessa Guillen's case helped mobilize generations of women that have struggled to deal with the betrayals of wanting to serve for your country, but being betrayed by your peers. So Vanessa Guillen was able to mobilize generations. And with that mobilization and advocacy, There have been changes to the Uniform Code Military Justice, and sexual harassment is now going to be something that service members can be charged for. And it's also the leading cause, according to a RAND report, of sexual harassment leads to sexual assault. So that is the impact that women have had in contributed to our history. Now that concludes my portion of the background and our contributions. I'm going to hand off the podium to my peer, Rocio Palmero. The floor is yours.
Thank you, friend. Thank you, sister. I just want to thank all of you for being here, and thank you so much, Krishna, for this history. It's so important to always acknowledge and remember that there's a reason why things are the way they are today. Whatever it is, whether it's positive or negative, it came from something and it came from somewhere, and it's important to always acknowledge that history. So thank you so much, Krishna, for that. So as some of you may or may not know, I love sending thank you notes. If you are a speaker at one of our programs, I'll send you a cyber thank you note. If you, sometimes if I have your email address, not because I stalked you, but because you gave it to me, I will send out a thank you note with glitter so that when you open it, it's everywhere and you can never, ever get rid of it. It just takes forever to get rid of it. I don't care how many times you mop. Do you know why I send thank you notes? I send them because I want to make sure that anyone who goes above and beyond in their acts and thinking of me enough to gift me anything, or sometimes just when someone takes time to celebrate me, I send those thank you notes. And so to that, I would like to read a thank you note to my veteran sisters. Thank you to my sisters who heard the call. You risked your life as nurses and disguised as men during the Civil War. You were deployed to Europe during World War I, and you were enlisted to support the war during World War II, even though over 350,000 of you did not have permanent status, and you only made 2/3 of what enlisted men were making. Thank you to those whose influence encouraged President Truman to sign that Women's Armed Services Integration Act, which enabled women to serve as permanent, regular members of the Navy, the Marine Corps, Army, and Air Force. We wouldn't be here without you. We thank you for those sisters who broke the barriers and fought the system and showed our country that our contributions as women and veterans is just as valuable and important as those of our male counterparts. Thank you to those of you who fought to have your spouses treated as equals, because existing in a culture that only accepted men as service member and women as non-service member spouses should never be the norm. Thank you to all my sisters who served in combat zones, but weren't considered combat veterans, despite having risked your lives to support the exact same campaigns as those of our brothers and sisters in World War I, World War II, Korea, where 120,000 of you served, Vietnam, where 11,000 of you served, Iraq and Afghanistan, where over 350,000 sisters were deployed to. Thank you to all my sisters who were our firsts, changing histories, making history, opening the door so that our younger sisters can follow suit. Thanks to all of you that came before us, for your contribution broke through the walls of prejudice, small-mindedness, gender biases that hindered us, because you made it possible for us to be here today. We stand together and side by side because of the work of your hands. Our sisters, whose veteran statuses were born of necessity, hearing an honorable call and choosing to answer it nobly, because no one has ever had to motivate us with a draft, despite the fact that we have always had to fight for the same benefits that were freely given to our brothers. We thank our sisters as we stand beside them, encouraging them, being part of a very exclusive club. For our sisters have come in waves towards a beach throughout history, growing in numbers, in strength, mighty in power, allowing each generation to stand on the shoulders of those that came before us, so that more can come after, doing all that we can so that our younger sisters can have it better than we did. The hope for so many of us who have witnessed our sisters making history is that the next generation of servicewomen can experience their own breakthroughs as we stand shoulder to shoulder. Last but not least, We thank you, sisters, who made the ultimate sacrifice, paid the ultimate price, but did not make it home. The memory of what you did will not be forgotten by those who are still here. And for our sisters who did make it home and found that life was too difficult to deal with and that this world would be better without you, I wish that you would have returned to a place where you could have asked for help, that you would have been heard, where someone could have said thank you for your service in the hopes that maybe you would still be here today. This world is a different place because your contributions and the beauty of who you were is no longer here for us to experience it. Thank you to my sisters. You are amazing. You are important. You are beautiful. You answered that call. You wore the same uniform. You left your fingerprints in history while being daughters, sisters, mothers, and friends. Too much is given, much is expected. To she who is given more is expected more. May we continue to make history every day. And this is a personal note. As the program coordinator of Women Vets on Point, we just want you to know that we see you, we thank you, and that we're here for you. Reach out to me, reach out to Krishna, reach out to any of us. If you find a woman that needs help or a woman that needs support, that's what we're here for. Thank you. Now I would like to take